Hi guys, today I will show you how to create an application that follows clean architecture. I already created a tutorial about this in my blog in alexcodetuts.com. You can use my blog as reference. Also, the code that I will use in this video is available here in my blog, so you can go to my blog, copy the code if you need to, and paste them in your project. So before we start coding, I just want to give you some introduction about what is a clean architecture. So this diagram here is a sample of a clean architecture. As you can see, we have the domain in our core. So the domain contains our entities, which is classes that only have properties on it. It does not have any dependency on any ORM like entity framework, just pure entities. And then we have the application layer. The application layer contains our business logic. Actually, the validation about entities, we do it in the application layer, not in the domain layer. And then we have the presentation layer and the infrastructure layer. The infrastructure, this is responsible on connecting to our database, deciding what ORM that we need to use, and other things that relate to, for example, in the files, what library that we have to use. All of them are in the infrastructure layer. Then the presentation layer, this is responsible on presenting the data to the client. Like in our case in this project, it is the web API. It will present the data to our client application, which is built using React.js. So I think that's enough for an introduction. So let's start creating our project. I will be using Visual Studio 2019 and .NET Framework 3.1. So if you don't have that in your machine, please download them first before continuing because you really need them. Okay, so let's start. Create a new project. Select ASP.NET Core Web Application. And then this application is about managing an invoice. So I will call this Invoice Management App.API. The project is API and the solution is just invoice management app. Click create. Select the React.js template and then change the authentication to individual user. Click OK, then click create. Now, if you see in our project, this is a basic ASP.NET Core application and we have our client application which is the client app that built using React.js. So it does not have the node modules yet. To download the needed node modules, let's build the project by pressing Ctrl Shift B. This will take a lot of time depending on your internet, so I will just fast forward the video, okay? Now the build succeeded, so let's add the projects for our layer. So if we follow the layers here, we have domain, application, and infrastructure. So let's do that. Let's add the domain. For the domain, I will use the .NET Core, no, not .NET Core, .NET Standard Class Library. So let's search for class library, this one, .NET Standard. Invoice Management App.domain. Okay, here's our project. Delete the class 1 and then go to properties and make sure that we are using the latest .NET framework, which is 2.1. The 2.1 use C# 8 while the 2.0 still use the 7.3. There's some added code in 8.0 that did not exist in 7.3 like the coalescing assignment. You will see that later in my code, or maybe not later. When we do the mediator, I will show you what I mean. Then let's add another project per application. Once again, delete the class 1. And then change this to .NET Standard 2.1. Then for infrastructure, we'll be using the .NET Core class library. Where's that? .NET Core, this one. The reason for that is in the infrastructure, we will add the identity server, and identity server is not supported in .NET Standard. It only supported in .NET Core. So let's create a new project and call this Invoice Management App.Infrastructure. Remember I told you earlier in introduction that the responsibility of connecting to the database should be in the infrastructure. It's not in the presentation layer. So the data, which is the application DB, contains the application DB context and the model for application user. This thing should be moved to invoice management infrastructure. So let's do that. Let's cut these two folders and paste it here in infrastructure. What happened? Okay, then for now, let's delete the migration table. We can add migration later. Change the namespace to infrastructure. Save it and then go to model. Change this to infrastructure. Now we are having a problem with the dependency like ASP.NET Core, Identity User, Entity Framework. So to resolve this, we need to install some NuGet packages. I already listed the needed packages in my blog, so you can just scroll down here. I will add the link in the description to my blog, so you can navigate here if you need to. So this is the needed package. So identity server, entity framework, entity framework, SQL server, and tools. So let's install them one by one. Manage NuGet packages. Now, after installing the packages, we need to handle the dependency injection because if you go to startup file, you can see we handle the injection here for the application DB context and application user. But the application DB context is no longer here in API, it's now here in infrastructure. So let's move the dependency injection here. So let's add a class. Let's call this dependency injection. Dependency injection. Then let's make this a public static class. Then let's add a method which is also public static. iService collection. Let's call this add infrastructure. Then it will, this is an extension method, so it expect to accept a parameter which is iService collection. So let's go to startup. Let's copy this iService collection services, paste it here, and then we also need the configuration because here we use the configuration. So let's copy this configuration, paste it here, resolve the import. I keep calling that import, it's using, then return services. Now let's copy this part, cut, and then move it to dependency injection in infrastructure. Then resolve the dependencies or the imports. Configuration, what's this? Oh, it's our configuration. Should small letter C. Get connection string, what's the problem here? I configuration. Oh, it's using automapper. This is my mistake. You should be careful on this one. See, we have an option, use automapper or use Microsoft extension. We should use the Microsoft extensions configuration. It's now resolved. Then after resolving the imports here, let's add the reference of infrastructure to our API. Infrastructure. Oh, click OK. And then here in our startup, we can just call services that add infrastructure. Configuration. That's it. And we also need to update the import here in login partial. Here instead of API model, it should be infrastructure models. Save it, and then why we have an error? Okay, remove this using in startup file. Now there's still something we need to do in program because we have to run the migration here in the program file. Also, if we have some kind of seeding that we need to do before the project start, we can do it here. So let's update the code here in program file. Instead of iHost builder, I will use iWebhost builder. So let's change this one. Create webhost builder and then webhost. Resolve the missing import and then delete this part. That use startup. And then this will be create web host. Let's store this in a variable name host, and let's remove the run for now. We will run this later. Then let's create a scope using var scope equals to host that services, create scope. Bar services equals to scope dot service provider. Now we can have a try catch here. Exception ex. Okay, in the try we will create a new context by using bar context equals to services, so it will get the dependency injection in the services and get required services application DB context. Then we can go context that migrate, context that database that migrate. If you have some kind of seeding, you can also run it here, this part, and then our exception should be exceptions, exception with capital E. So we will do a logging here. So logger equals to scope dot service provider dot get required service. Let's call that ilogger. Then logger dot log error. So this will run the this will log our error. So what should be a message? Let's say an error occurred while migrating or seeding the database. I think that's a good message. Then after this, let's run the host.run. Okay, I think that's all for the setup. Now, since we moved the database here in infrastructure and we haven't created the database yet, we need to add a migration. To do that, open your package manager console, make sure that the default project is the infrastructure, and then run the command add migration. Oops, I forgot to give the name, but anyway, it will ask me for a name. Let's call this initial migration. Now it's add migration here in infrastructure. Now let's update our database by executing the command update database. Now that it succeeded, we can run our application to test if this is still working. To check if our application is still working, let's try to register. Click here to confirm your account. Then let's log in. Then let's try to fetch the data. Now we can get the data. Let's try our account management. Here's our profile, email, password. two-factor authentication, first personal data. So I think everything is still working. So what we have done in this video is just create the structure of our application and then move the database related stuffs from our API or presentation layer to our infrastructure layer. I think this video is already too long, so I will stop here for now. In the next video, I will show you how to create an API using Mediator. So see you guys next time. Bye.